There are moments in life when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally look you in the eye and tell you that you're not enough. Not good enough. Not successful enough. Not worthy enough. And the cruelest part, they do it while showering your sister with a gift that changes her life. Today, I'm going to tell you what really happened when my own parents chose my sister over me, and how that moment of betrayal became my moment of liberation. Before I begin, I want you to know that what you're about to hear is the truth. It's filled with pain, it's filled with love twisted into something unrecognizable, and it's filled with a redemption I never saw coming. These are the stories that happen behind closed doors, the ones families don't talk about at dinner tables. The stories about favoritism, about being invisible in your own family, about the weight of disappointment that isn't yours to carry. If you're listening to this, and you know what it feels like to be the one left behind while your siblings are lifted up, I see you. If you've ever felt like the failure in your family's eyes, I've been there too. So before I tell you what really happened, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if this story moves you, if it makes you feel less alone in your own pain, please consider subscribing to Grandma True Stories. It means the world to me, and it helps others find the courage to speak their own truths. Now, let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Ellen Richardson, though most people call me Maggie. And this is the story of the day my family told me I was a failure. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. Our house was a modest 2-story colonial with white shutters and a front porch where my mother grew roses every spring. I had a younger sister, Patricia, Patty we called her, and she was, by all accounts, the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect smile. Perfect everything. I wasn't perfect. I was the middle child between an older brother who went to Yale and a younger sister who seemed to glide through life like she was walking on water. By the time I was 12, I'd already learned what it meant to be invisible. Not mistreated, exactly, just overlooked. Like a piece of furniture that nobody particularly noticed but everyone expected to be there. My parents weren't cruel people. That's what makes this so hard to talk about, even now, all these years later. They were good people. They went to church, they volunteered. My mother baked cookies for the church bake sale. My father coached Little League. But there's a particular kind of pain that comes from being disappointed in by people who are otherwise kind. Because you can't even be angry at them, not really. You're just confused. You're just sad. I did what I thought was the right thing. I went to a state university, not Yale like my brother, but a good school. I studied business. I worked part-time to help pay my own way through college, refusing to be a burden on my parents. I graduated with honors. I got a job at a mid-sized marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work and I was good at it. Meanwhile, Patty went to Northwestern. My parents bragged about it constantly. They had the bumper sticker on their car. They told everyone at church. When she came home with her first boyfriend, a handsome boy from a wealthy family, they treated him like he was already part of the family. I dated too. I had relationships. Some ended well, some didn't. That's life, isn't it? But my parents never asked me much about my personal life. They never seemed particularly invested in whether I was happy or lonely. It was like they'd already decided who I was going to be. The reliable one, the one who would always be fine on her own. And they stopped looking. By the time I was in my late 30s, I'd been passed over for 2 promotions at work. I'd survived a painful breakup with a man I thought I might marry, and I was living in a small apartment in a decent part of town, going through life in a sort of neutral gear. Not unhappy exactly, but not thriving either. I was existing, I was getting by. And I'd made peace with that. Patty, on the other hand, had gotten married to that handsome boyfriend from Northwestern. His name was David Monroe. His family owned real estate in Chicago. When Patty turned 28 and decided she wanted to buy a house in a prestigious suburb, her life seemed to arrange itself accordingly. That's when my parents called a family meeting. Now, a family meeting at my parents' house was serious business. My brother flew in from New York. I drove up from my apartment. We all sat around the dining room table. The same table where I'd done my homework 30 years ago, where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where my mother had carved the turkey every Thanksgiving. My father cleared his throat. He had that look on his face, the one he got before he was about to say something he thought was very important. "We've made a decision," he said, looking directly at Patty. Your mother and I want to help you and David with your down payment. We're going to give you $150,000. I remember the exact number because it repeated in my head over and over, like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Patty gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. She looked like she might cry happy tears. My mother was already smiling, her face bright with the satisfaction of being generous, of being able to give her daughter something that would change her daughter's life. We're so proud of you, my mother said, reaching over to squeeze Patty's hand. You've always known what you wanted, and you've always worked hard to achieve it. This is our blessing on your next chapter. I sat there. I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. Because what was there to say? My brother congratulated Patty. He'd already inherited some money from an uncle, so this wasn't surprising to him. It was just the way things worked in our family. Money flowed toward those who seemed destined to succeed, and dried up for those of us who were just fine, just getting by, just failing to launch. After we finished eating, I went into the kitchen to help my mother clear the dishes. This was our ritual, the two of us alone, washing and drying, while my father watched television and my brother and sister talked in the living room. My mother didn't look at me while we worked. She was humming, actually humming, a little tune under her breath. Happy, satisfied, complete. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Mom, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. What about me? She turned to look at me surprised, as if she'd forgotten I was there. What about you, dear? I'm struggling too, I heard myself say. I'm working hard, but I'm barely making ends meet. My rent keeps going up. I'm 38 years old and I still don't own my own home. My mother put down the dish she was holding. She dried her hands on a towel, and then she did something I'll never forget. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts pity and disappointment. Maggie, she said, and her voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. We can't help everyone. Patty and David are buying a house in one of the best neighborhoods in Illinois. This is an investment in their future. You're doing fine on your own? Fine, I heard myself say. I'm not fine. I'm struggling, Mom. And I don't understand why Patty gets this help and I don't. My father appeared in the doorway. He must have heard us talking. Because Patty is making something of herself, he said, and his voice had an edge to it. She married well. She and David have a 5-year plan. They have ambition. They know what they want. I have ambition, I said, but I heard myself. I sounded defensive, small, like a child. Do you? My father asked, and it wasn't cruel the way he asked it. It was just matter of fact, like he was stating an obvious truth. Maggie, you're a good person. You're reliable. You're stable. But let's be honest. You've never wanted anything badly enough to go after it. You're content to just exist. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Content to just exist. Is that how they saw me? Was I really that invisible, that forgettable, that much of a failure? I gave you $30,000 to help with college, my father continued. I helped you buy your first car. I've always been there when you needed me. But at some point, you have to take responsibility for your own life. And frankly, Maggie, you've never shown the kind of initiative that would make us confident investing more in your future. I remember standing there with my hands submerged in dishwater, and I remember thinking, he's right. They're right. I am a failure. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I made a decision I didn't even know I was capable of making. I didn't leave my parents' house in anger that day. I left in silence. I dried my hands on that same kitchen towel my mother had used 100 times before. I finished loading the dishwasher. I said goodnight to everyone in a voice that sounded normal, even though nothing felt normal anymore. And then I drove back to my apartment in the dark, the highway stretching out in front of me like it was trying to lead me somewhere, anywhere, away from who I'd been. I didn't cry. That's what surprised me the most. I thought I would cry. I thought I would go home, close the door to my tiny one-bedroom apartment and let myself fall apart. But I didn't. Instead, I felt something shift inside me, something hard and cold and determined settling into place, like a bone that had been broken and was finally setting straight. My apartment that night felt smaller than usual. I looked around at what I'd built for myself over the past 15 years. A couch I'd bought on sale at a furniture store. A small television. Books stacked on shelves I'd assembled myself from IKEA. Kitchen utensils I'd collected piece by piece. It was a life, but it was a small one, safe, quiet, unremarkable. And my father was right about one thing: I had been content to just exist. But that night, something changed. That night, I stopped being content. I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and a piece of paper. No computer, just the old-fashioned way, because I needed to feel the words coming out of me, and I wrote down everything I wanted. Not things, goals, real concrete terrifying goals. Own a house, buy it myself, no help from anyone, save enough money to be completely independent, never ask my family for anything again. Rebuild a life so good, so undeniable, so completely my own that no one could ever call me a failure again. I stared at those words for a long time. They seemed impossible. I made decent money at my job, maybe 65,000 a year at that point, but housing prices were rising, and I didn't have any savings to speak of. I'd lived paycheck to paycheck for so long that I didn't even know how to stop. But I had to try. Because the alternative was going back to that comfortable numbness, and I could no longer pretend that numb was the same as happy. The next day I did something I'd never done before. I took a hard look at my finances. Really looked at them. I pulled out every credit card statement, every bank statement, every receipt I'd saved, and I made a list of every single place I was wasting money. The subscription services I never used, the daily coffee that cost $5, the dinners out when I could have eaten at home, the clothes I bought because I was sad or lonely or bored, the car payment that was higher than it needed to be because I'd bought something too fancy for my actual life. I'd been bleeding money for years without even realizing it. That weekend, I made a plan. Not just a wish, but an actual plan with steps and timelines and realistic milestones. I would cut my expenses to the absolute bare minimum. I would work extra hours at my job. I would take on freelance work in the evenings. I would do whatever it took to save enough money for a down payment on a house within 5 years. 5 years, it seemed like an eternity. But it also seemed possible, and that was more than I'd felt in a long time. The first thing I did was call my bank and consolidate my credit cards. I cut them into pieces, actually cut them with scissors, so I wouldn't be tempted to use them. I set up a separate savings account and started depositing every extra penny I could scrape together. $50 here, $100 there. It felt like drops of water in an ocean, but I kept going anyway. I stopped going out with friends on Friday nights. I started meal prepping on Sundays, the same meals, the same ingredients, week after week. It was boring, but it was cheap. I moved to a smaller, less expensive apartment. I started walking to work when the weather was nice to save on gas. I got a second job at a bookstore on Saturday mornings. Then I picked up freelance writing projects in the evenings. My life became very small and very focused. Work, save, sleep, repeat. People noticed. My coworkers asked me where I was during lunch. My old friends stopped calling because I always said no to their invitations. My brother sent me a text asking if I was okay because I'd missed a family birthday dinner. I didn't respond. I couldn't respond because how do you explain to people that you've decided to completely rebuild your life because your own father called you a failure? 3 months into my plan, I had saved $8,000. It wasn't much, but it was something I'd earned myself, something no one had given me, something that was mine. 6 months in, I had $18,000. A year in, I had $50,000. And something miraculous happened around that 1-year mark. The panic that had driven me initially started to transform into something else. It became purpose. It became pride. It became a quiet, stubborn certainty that I was going to prove everyone wrong. I didn't just want a house anymore. I wanted to build something. I wanted to show my family, and more importantly, I wanted to show myself that I wasn't the failure they decided I was. But there was something else that happened during that year, something that surprised me more than anything else. I stopped being angry at my parents. Not because I forgave them, not because what they'd done didn't hurt, but because I realized that their opinion of me didn't have to be my opinion of myself. They'd looked at me and seen a failure. But I was looking at myself and seeing someone who was capable, someone who was strong, someone who could take her own life in her hands and remake it into something beautiful. Their dismissal of me had been cruel. But it had also been a gift, though I didn't understand that yet. Around the 18-month mark, something shifted in my work life too. I'd been so focused on saving money that I hadn't noticed I'd also been getting better at my job. The extra hours I was working, the energy I was pouring into my projects, it was paying off. My boss noticed. She called me into her office one day and offered me a promotion. It came with a raise of $20,000 a year. I remember sitting in that office chair, my hands trembling as she told me about the new position. I wasn't the most popular person in the office. I wasn't the one who went out to happy hour with everyone. I wasn't the one who was the center of attention. But I was reliable, I was focused, I was good at what I did, and apparently that mattered. That raise changed everything. My timeline suddenly accelerated. What I thought would take 5 years to achieve I could now do in 3. 2 years into my plan, I had 120,000 saved. 2.5 years in, I had 160,000, and I knew I was ready. I spent months looking at houses. Not fancy houses. Not houses in the most prestigious neighborhoods. Just solid, well-built homes in good neighborhoods with potential. I toured houses, I had inspections done. I worked with a real estate agent who believed in me, who didn't question how a single woman my age could afford to buy a house without a co-signer or family money. And then, on a sunny day in spring, exactly 2 years and 8 months after my parents' devastating family meeting, I found it. It was a 1970s colonial in a quiet neighborhood about 30 minutes north of the city. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with room for a garden. It needed work. There were updates to be made. Floors to refinish, walls to repaint. But the bones were good. It was solid. It was real. And it was mine the moment I saw it. I made an offer. I put down a down payment that made my real estate agent's eyes go wide. She asked me where the money came from. I told her I'd saved it myself. She smiled like she understood that this was about more than just buying a house. The offer was accepted. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers. All of them. With my own signature. My own name on the deed. My own responsibility for every mortgage payment, every repair, every burden and blessing that came with owning something real. I didn't tell my family. I didn't call my parents to share the news. I didn't invite anyone to see it. For the first time in my life, I had something beautiful that was mine, and I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need them at all. The day I got my keys, I drove to my new house and I walked through every room. I stood in the middle of the living room, and I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, pure, uncomplicated pride in myself. I had done this. Me. Not my parents. Not my family. Me. I was no longer the failure they decided I was. I was the woman who had taken nothing but her own determination and had built something real. For 2 years, I didn't speak to my family. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not my sister. No phone calls, no emails, no text messages, no Christmas cards, no birthday wishes, nothing. I simply disappeared from their lives, and I let them wonder what they'd done. I don't say that with pride, exactly. It's not something I'm proud of. But it's the truth, and the truth is what I'm here to tell you. The first few months were hard. I kept thinking my mother would call. I kept thinking my father would reach out with an apology or an explanation. I kept thinking that maybe they would realize they'd hurt me, and they would do what parents are supposed to do. They would make it right. They didn't call. My birthday came 6 months after I'd bought my house. I waited for the phone to ring. My parents had never missed my birthday, not once in 40 years. But that year, the phone stayed silent. My mother didn't send a card. My father didn't leave a voicemail. It was like I'd died, and they decided not to acknowledge it. I told myself I didn't care. And in a way I didn't. Because I was building a life that didn't depend on their validation anymore. But there's a part of the human heart that always wants her parents to be proud of her, and that part of me ached in a way I didn't expect. I threw myself into my house instead. I painted the walls. I refinished the hardwood floors. I spent my weekends at hardware stores and my evenings watching YouTube videos about home repair. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet, how to caulk a window, how to patch drywall. All the small things that homeowners know how to do, but that I'd never learned because I'd never owned anything before. My colleagues at work noticed the change in me. I was calmer now, more confident. I didn't need their approval either, and somehow that made me more likable. I started getting invited to things again, and sometimes I said yes. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class on Thursday nights. I went on a date with a man named Robert who worked at the grocery store, and even though it didn't lead anywhere, it felt good to remember that I was alive and capable of connection. My brother sent me an email around the 1-year mark of my silence. The subject line was, "Mom and Dad are worried about you." I almost deleted it without reading it, but I didn't. I opened it and read it through. "Maggie," he wrote, "I don't know what happened between you and Mom and Dad, but they're concerned. You haven't responded to any of their calls or emails. Mom cries about it. Dad won't talk about it, but I know he's upset. Whatever you're angry about, I think you need to find a way to forgive them. They're your parents and they love you. Can you please just call them?" I read that email 3 times. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I let myself feel the anger I'd been suppressing. My parents loved me. They had a funny way of showing it. I typed out a response. I poured all of my hurt into those words. I told my brother about the 150,000. I told him about being called a failure. I told him about my father's words. You've never wanted anything badly enough. And how they had cut me in a way I don't think he could understand. And then I deleted it. All of it. Because what was the point? My brother didn't understand. He never would. He'd gone to Yale and become a successful lawyer. He had never been the invisible one. He had never been dismissed. He had never felt that particular weight of being found wanting. Instead, I sent him a simple message. Tell Mom and Dad I'm fine. I'm just not ready to talk right now. And I left it at that. 18 months into my silence, my sister tried to reach out. She called me one afternoon. I almost didn't answer. My name flashed on my phone and my heart did something complicated in my chest. But I picked up. Maggie? Her voice sounded uncertain, like she wasn't sure I'd still know who she was. It's Patty. I wasn't sure you'd answer. Hi, Patty, I said. My voice sounded calm. I was proud of that. I haven't heard from you in forever, she said. Mom and Dad said you cut off contact, but I wanted to hear it from you. Are you okay? What happened? I could have told her then. I could have explained about the meeting, about the money, about feeling like I didn't matter. But something in me held back. It wasn't her fault that she'd been the favorite. It wasn't her fault that our parents had given her what they'd refused to give me. I'm fine, I said. I just needed some space. From us? From all of it? I said. The family dynamics. The expectations, everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I heard you bought a house. I felt something shift in my chest, so they did know. My parents had found out somehow. Yes, I said simply. I bought a house. That's amazing, Maggie. I'm really happy for you. I wanted to ask her if she meant it. I wanted to ask her if she realized how much of a contrast it was to the way they'd all treated me. But I didn't. Instead, I said, thank you for calling, Patty. But I'm still not ready to talk to Mom and Dad. I hope you understand. I do, she said. And then she added, if you ever change your mind, I'm here. After we hung up, I sat on my front porch and looked out at my yard. The grass was getting long. I'd planted some flower beds in the spring, and they were starting to bloom. It was my house. My yard, my life. And I was starting to feel like I'd built something real here, something that didn't need anyone's approval to matter. 2 years into my silence, my mother got sick. My brother called me to tell me. His voice was tight with stress and worry. It's pneumonia, he said. She's in the hospital. The doctors say she'll recover, but she's 72 years old and she's scared. I listened to him talk. I felt the familiar pull of family obligation, the weight of being a daughter, the instinct to rush to my mother's bedside, because that's what daughters do. But I also remembered standing in my parents' kitchen, my hands in dishwater, listening to my father tell me that I was a failure. I'm glad you called to let me know, I said finally. Tell her I hope she recovers quickly. Maggie, come on, my brother said, and there was frustration in his voice now. This is serious. Mom needs her family right now. Can you please put aside whatever this is and come see her? I can't, I said, and I meant it. I'm not ready. My mother recovered from the pneumonia. It took 3 weeks in the hospital and another month of recovery at home, but she pulled through. My brother told me about it when he called with an update. My father had apparently barely left her side the whole time she was sick. It was, he said, probably good for their marriage. It reminded them what was important. I wondered if he realized that what was important should have included me. But I didn't say that. I just said I was glad she was okay, and we ended the call. I thought about my mother a lot during those weeks. I wondered if she'd thought about me while she was lying in that hospital bed. I wondered if she'd regretted the things she'd said to me. I wondered if she'd realized how much her dismissal had hurt. But I didn't call her. And she didn't call me. My father had heart surgery the following year. Not a heart attack, just a valve that needed replacing. A routine surgery for a 75-year-old man, my brother explained. But it was still surgery, and my father still spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Again, my brother reached out. Again he asked me to come see him. And again I said I couldn't. Why? My brother asked, and I could hear the exasperation in his voice. Why are you doing this, Maggie? Whatever happened, whatever they did, it's been almost 3 years. Don't you think it's time to let it go? Maybe, I said. But I'm not there yet. And that was honest. I wasn't holding on to the anger anymore. The anger had faded into something quieter, something more like a closed door. But the door was still closed, and I wasn't ready to open it. My father recovered from his surgery. He had to slow down a bit, had to watch what he ate and how much he exercised. He was becoming an old man, my brother told me. His hair was all gray now. He moved slower. He tired more easily. I listened to this information as if my brother was telling me about a stranger, and in a way he was. The man my brother was describing, the aging father, the vulnerable man worried about his heart, wasn't the same man who had looked at me across that dining room table and told me I'd never wanted anything badly enough. Or maybe it was the same man, and I just couldn't reconcile the two images of him in my head. 3 years into my silence, I had made a life that didn't need them. I had grown into my house. I had refinished the hardwood floors and painted every wall. I had learned to use a chainsaw and trimmed the trees in my backyard. I had planted a garden and grown vegetables. I had built bookshelves and hung pictures and made the house feel like home. I had friends now. Good friends. People who knew me and liked me and didn't spend their time wondering if I was a failure or a success. They just knew me as Maggie, the woman who baked good cookies and hosted good dinner parties and told good stories. I was happy. Not perfectly happy. I still thought about my family sometimes. Still wondered if they'd ever try to reach out, still felt that small ache in my chest that never quite went away. But I was genuinely, deeply happy for the first time in my life. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late spring, everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late May. I remember because I was planting tomatoes in my garden, cherry tomatoes, the kind that grow abundantly and taste like summer. I had dirt under my fingernails and sweat on my forehead, and I was happy in that simple, uncomplicated way that comes from doing something with your hands and seeing immediate results. My house sits on a quiet street lined with maple trees. It's the kind of neighborhood where people know each other, but don't intrude on each other's business. We wave from our driveways. We leave casseroles on porches when someone's sick. We're the kind of community that has found a balance between connection and privacy. That Tuesday, a car I didn't recognize slowed down as it passed my house. I didn't think much of it at first. People drove by all the time. But then the car stopped, right in front of my mailbox. I stood up from my garden bed, wiping my hands on my jeans, and watched as the driver's side window rolled down. It was my sister, Patty. I hadn't seen her in 3 years. 3 years since that phone call where I'd been polite but distant, where I'd kept my pain to myself and let her believe it was just a temporary rift that would eventually heal. She was looking at my house like she was seeing something impossible. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel, and even from across the yard, I could see the shock on her face. "Maggie," she called out. "Eyes that you." I should have retreated into the house. I should have waved politely and excused myself. I should have done any number of things. But I didn't. I walked toward her car, my heart doing something complicated in my chest. "Hi, Patty," I said when I reached her window. "Your house," she said, and her voice sounded strange, not angry, not judgmental, but something else entirely. "Maggie, this is incredible." I had no idea. I looked at my house like I was seeing it through her eyes. 3 years of love and hard work had transformed it from a tired 1970s colonial into something beautiful. The exterior had been painted a soft sage green with cream trim. The shutters were new. The front flower beds overflowed with perennials that my neighbor had helped me plant. The lawn was manicured. The whole property radiated care and pride. "Thank you," I said carefully. "I've been working on it." "How did you?" Patty trailed off, then started again. "I mean, Mom and Dad said you bought a house, but I had no idea it was anything like this. This is beautiful, Maggie. Really beautiful." There was something in her voice that I didn't recognize. Admiration. Maybe, or envy, or both. "I'm glad you like it," I said. And then, because I couldn't help myself, I added, "I bought it on my own. Saved the down payment myself. Worked hard to make it what it is." I saw her flinch slightly at that. She understood what I was saying. She understood that I was pointing out that I had done something I wasn't supposed to be able to do, that my parents had doubted I could do, that they had deemed unworthy of their help. "Can I see inside?" she asked suddenly. I know that's probably... I know you might not want me to, but could I just see what you've done with it?" Every rational part of my brain said no. This was my sanctuary. This was the physical manifestation of my independence and my strength. I didn't need my sister to validate it. I didn't need her approval. But there was a smaller, more human part of me that wanted to show her. That wanted to show someone from my family what I'd built. That wanted to prove something that I'd already proven to myself 1,000 times over. Okay? I heard myself say. Come on in. I gave her a tour like I was showing off my greatest achievement, which I suppose I was. I showed her the hardwood floors I'd had refinished. I showed her the kitchen I'd remodeled on a tight budget, learning everything from YouTube tutorials. I showed her the guest bedroom and the master bedroom, and the bathroom where I'd installed new tile myself. And I showed her my office, the room at the back of the house where I'd set up a desk and bookshelves and where I worked on my freelance projects that supplemented my full-time job. This was where I'd spent countless evenings and weekends building multiple income streams so I could afford to maintain this house, afford to live independently, afford to never have to ask my parents for anything ever again. Patty was quiet as I showed her through. She would occasionally run her hand along the wall or look out a window or examine the details of something I'd done, and I could see something working behind her eyes, some kind of internal calculation happening. When we finished the tour, we ended up back in the kitchen. I made coffee because it felt like the civilized thing to do, even though I wasn't entirely sure what we were doing here, in my house, after 3 years of not speaking beyond that one polite phone call. You did all this yourself? She asked, sitting at my kitchen table. Most of it, I said. I hired professionals for the big stuff, the electrical work, the plumbing, the roof repairs. But yes, I designed it and coordinated it and paid for it. All of it. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and looked at me like she was trying to see inside my head. I owe you an apology, she said finally. I wasn't expecting that. I opened my mouth to respond and nothing came out. Not just me, she continued. All of us. Mom and Dad especially, but also me. And I think I'm only now understanding why you cut us off. I set my coffee down carefully. What changed? I asked. Patty took a long breath. David and I have been having some trouble, she said. Financial trouble, actually. The market shifted, his family business had some problems, and suddenly we're not in such great shape anymore. And I've been talking to Mom about it, and she's been trying to help, trying to give us advice on managing our money. She paused, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. And Mom said something that just struck me the wrong way. Patty continued. She said, well, you have advantages that Maggie never had. And I started thinking about that. About the $150,000. About how she just gave it to us like it was nothing. And I started thinking about you and how you never asked for help and how you just disappeared. I didn't disappear, I said quietly. I withdrew. I know, Patty said. And I'm starting to understand why. When Mom said that thing about advantages, I realized you're not struggling because you don't have advantages. You built something real without them. And David and I are struggling because we were given everything and didn't know how to manage it. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to take satisfaction in the irony, the golden child struggling while the failure thrived. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for all the years we'd lost. Sad for the family I couldn't trust. Sad that it had taken a crisis for my sister to see me. I'm sorry I didn't call, Patty said. I'm sorry I didn't reach out when you cut contact. I should have pushed harder. I should have asked why you were really mad instead of just accepting what Mom and Dad told me. They didn't tell you why. I asked. They said you were going through something and needed space. They never explained about the meeting, about what they said to you. David mentioned it once. He said something about 150,000, and I asked Mom about it and she got defensive and changed the subject. So they hadn't even told her the real reason. They'd hidden their own cruelty from her, which somehow made it even worse. It meant they knew what they'd done was wrong, and they were too ashamed to explain it. They called me a failure, I said simply. Your father told me I'd never wanted anything badly enough. Your mother implied that I didn't deserve their help because I didn't have the same ambition you did. And then they gave you 150,000 to buy a house. Patty's face went pale. They said that to you. They did. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God, Maggie, I had no idea they said those things. That's horrible. That's abuse. I'd never thought of it that way before. I'd thought of it as disappointment, rejection, cruelty. But maybe she was right. Maybe calling your daughter a failure, refusing to help her while lavishing money on her sister, was a form of abuse. I just needed to prove to myself that I could do it alone, I said. I needed to know that I wasn't a failure, that I could build something real and beautiful and good without their validation. And you did, Patty said. She looked around my kitchen like she was seeing it for the first time. You absolutely did. "This house is beautiful, Maggie. But more than that, you're beautiful. The way you've built your life, the person you've become, the independence you've achieved, that's beautiful." We sat in my kitchen for 3 hours that afternoon. We drank coffee and talked about everything we'd missed in the past 3 years. She told me about her struggles with David, about the pressure they'd been under, about how money, the very thing that had been given to her so easily, had become a source of anxiety and stress. I told her about my life, about the promotions and the raise, about the pottery classes and the book club, about Robert and the other dates, none of which had led anywhere serious, but all of which had reminded me that I was capable of connection and love. And we talked about our parents, about how complicated love can be when it's tangled up with expectations and favoritism and disappointment, about how I couldn't just forgive them yet, but maybe someday I would, about how she could go back and talk to them about what they'd said, and maybe that would be the beginning of something. Before she left, Patty hugged me. A real hug, not the polite kind we'd exchanged at family gatherings before I cut contact. A hug that felt like an apology and a recognition and a beginning. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know I don't have the right to say that, but I am. I'm really proud of you, Maggie." I held her close and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken family could be healed. Not immediately, not without a lot of work and honesty and difficult conversations, but healed nonetheless. After Patty left, I stood on my front porch and looked out at my property, the house I'd built, the garden I'd planted, the life I'd created, and I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. I had already won. I had already proven myself. The only question that remained was, what would I do with that victory? After Patty left my house that afternoon, I didn't call my parents. I wasn't ready. The wound was still too fresh, the anger still too close to the surface. But Patty had planted a seed, and I couldn't quite stop thinking about what she'd said. "Maybe someday you'll be able to talk to them about it." Someday? Not today, not this week, but someday. I spent the next few days replaying that conversation with my sister over and over in my head. I thought about my father's surgery, about my mother's pneumonia, about how fragile life is. I thought about the fact that my parents were aging, that they wouldn't be around forever, and that if I didn't find a way to address what had happened between us, I would carry this wound to my grave. But I also thought about my own needs. I thought about the 3 years of silence I'd had to protect myself. I thought about how necessary that silence had been, how it had saved me, how it had allowed me to build something real and good. I wasn't going to rush back into their arms like nothing had happened. I wasn't going to pretend that the hurt didn't exist, or that I was ready to move past it. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to have a conversation. A week later, I called my brother. "Maggie." He sounded shocked. It was the first time I'd initiated contact since I'd cut off the family. "Hi," I said. "I'm calling to ask you for a favor." "Anything," he said. "God, it's good to hear your voice." I wanted to feel angry at him for that, for making it about him when this was my story, my pain. But I was tired of being angry, so I just accepted it. "I want to meet with Mom and Dad," I said. "Not at their house, not at a family gathering. I want to meet them somewhere neutral, and I want you there. I need a mediator, someone who understands what happened but isn't personally involved." There was a long pause. "What changed?" my brother asked finally. "Patty came to see me," I said. "She saw my house, and she realized that I'd accomplished something significant. We talked. And she helped me understand that maybe it's time to address what happened instead of just running from it." "I think that's a good idea," my brother said carefully. "Do you want me to talk to them first? Prepare them? Tell them I want to meet," I said. "Tell them it's important. Tell them I'm not doing this to attack them or punish them. Tell them I'm doing this because I need to be heard and because I need to understand how we got here." "Okay," my brother said. "I'll set it up." It took 2 weeks to arrange. My parents wanted to meet at their house, but I refused. Too much history there, too many ghosts. Instead, we agreed on a neutral location, a quiet restaurant that my brother knew, a place with private booths where we could talk without being overheard. I was terrified. In the days leading up to that meeting, I barely slept. I kept replaying conversations in my head, imagining how it would go. I imagined my father getting defensive. I imagined my mother crying. I imagined them telling me I was overreacting, that I was holding on to old hurts, that I needed to move on and stop being so sensitive. And I imagined myself walking out, telling them I'd made a mistake in trying to reach out, that some bridges were too damaged to repair. But I also imagined something else. I imagined them listening, really listening. I imagined them understanding the harm they'd caused. I imagined them apologizing, not the kind of half-hearted apology that dismisses your pain, but a real one. The kind that acknowledges what they did and takes responsibility for it. I didn't know which scenario would actually happen. But I showed up anyway. I arrived at the restaurant early and sat in the booth that my brother had reserved. I ordered water with lemon and tried to calm my heart. When I saw my parents walk in, I almost didn't recognize them. They'd aged. Really aged. My father was using a cane, something he hadn't been when I'd last seen him 3 years ago. His frame had shrunk, and his hair had gone completely white. My mother moved slowly beside him, her hand on his arm, her face lined with worry. This wasn't the couple who had dismissed me as a failure. This was an old man and an old woman, struggling to navigate their way through a restaurant to meet with a daughter who had cut them off. My brother was right behind them. He caught my eye and gave me an encouraging nod. They sat down across from me. My mother immediately reached across the table like she was going to take my hand, and then she stopped, unsure if she was allowed to touch me. "Hi, Mom," I said quietly. "Hi, Dad?" "Maggie," my mother said, and her voice broke. "Oh, Maggie, it's so good to see you." "I know it's been a long time," I said. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. I wasn't going to let them bypass the hard part and just jump straight to reconciliation. "I'm glad we're doing this, but I need to say some things, and I need you to listen without interrupting." My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. 3 years ago, you gave Patty $150,000 for a house down payment," I began. "When I asked why you didn't help me, Dad, you told me that I'd never wanted anything badly enough. You said I was content to just exist. And Mom, you implied that I didn't deserve your investment because I didn't have the same ambition as Patty." I watched my father's face. He looked away, shame written across his features. "That hurt me," I continued. "It hurt me more than almost anything anyone has ever said to me, because it came from my parents, from the people who are supposed to believe in me no matter what. And when I realized you weren't going to apologize, when I realized you didn't even see what you'd done wrong, I made a decision. I decided I was going to build something on my own. I was going to prove to myself, not to you, but to me, that I wasn't a failure, Maggie." My mother started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not done," I said gently. "I bought a house. I did it on my own. I worked extra hours. I took on freelance work. I cut my expenses to almost nothing. And I did it. I built something beautiful and real and entirely my own. And do you know what the most painful part was?" My parents shook their heads. "The most painful part was that I never wanted to do it to prove something to you. I had to prove it to myself because you had convinced me that I wasn't capable of it. You had made me believe that I was a failure. And it took building that house, buying that property, creating that life on my own for me to understand that you were wrong about me." I could see my mother crying silently now. My father had his hand over his mouth, his eyes closed. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. And this was the hardest part. This was the part where I had to be honest about the limits of my healing. I don't know if I can just move past this and pretend it didn't happen. But I'm willing to talk about it. I'm willing to try to understand how we got here. My father opened his eyes. He looked at me with a vulnerability I'd never seen from him before. "You're right," he said quietly. "We were wrong. I was wrong." The restaurant seemed to go very quiet. "I've had a lot of time to think about this," my father continued. 3 years of your silence. Your mother cried for months. I kept telling myself you'd come around, that you were being unreasonable, that you'd eventually realize we were trying to help your sister. But the truth is," he paused, and I could see him struggling with something internal. "The truth is, I was jealous of you," he said finally. That wasn't what I expected him to say. I felt my chest tighten. "When you were growing up, you were so independent," my father continued. "You didn't need us the way your brother did, the way Patty did. You were capable and self-sufficient, and frankly, it made me feel unnecessary. And I think, without even realizing it, I started to resent you for that. And when your brother went to Yale, and when Patty wanted to buy a house, I saw an opportunity to feel needed again. So I gave them money. I told myself it was because they deserved it, but really, it was because I needed them to need me." My mother was openly crying now. My brother looked like he was holding his breath. "And you," my father said, looking at me, "you never asked for my help. You never asked for anything, so I convinced myself that you didn't want my help, and when you did ask, when you finally asked me for something, I was so caught up in my own insecurities that I responded with cruelty instead of love." He stopped talking. The restaurant noise seemed very loud all of a sudden. "I'm sorry, Maggie," my father said. "I'm truly sorry, not just for what I said that day, but for years of making you feel like you didn't matter. That's on me. That's my failure, not yours." I felt something inside me crack open. Something I'd been holding on to for 3 years, something that had calcified and hardened into certainty, suddenly became more liquid, more permeable, more able to change. "Thank you for saying that," I said. My voice was shaking. "I needed to hear you say that." My mother reached across the table again, and this time I let her take my hand. "I love you so much," she said. "I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of who you've become, of what you've built, of your strength." I should have said that years ago. I should have said it instead of what we said. We sat there together, my broken, imperfect family, in a booth in a quiet restaurant, and we cried. My brother cried. My parents cried. And I cried too. Not from sadness anymore, but from something more complicated. Relief, release. The beginning of healing. We talked for 3 hours that night. We talked about why my parents had made the choices they'd made. We talked about the pressure they felt to be good parents. We talked about how the comparison between my brother and me had made my father feel competitive instead of proud. We talked about how my mother had deferred to my father's decisions even when she disagreed with them. And most importantly, we talked about the future. My parents wanted to meet me. They wanted to see my house. They wanted to know about my life. The real life I'd built, not the fragments they'd known about through my brother and sister. I told them that I wasn't ready to pretend nothing had happened. But I told them I was willing to try. I was willing to build something new with them. Something that acknowledged the pain of the past but wasn't defined by it. "It won't be the same as it was," I said. "But maybe it can be better. Maybe we can all be more honest about our failures and our needs and our fears." My father nodded. "I'd like that," he said. When we left the restaurant that night, my mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. My father held me for a long time, and I could feel him shaking slightly, and I realized that he was crying too. "Thank you for giving us a chance," he whispered. I didn't say, "You're welcome," because that would have implied that this was easy or that I was doing them a favor. Instead, I just held him and let myself feel what it was like to be held by my father without anger between us. It was a beginning. The week after that conversation in the restaurant, my parents came to see my house. I'd spent days preparing, not because I felt like I needed to impress them. I'd already moved past that, but because I wanted them to really see what I'd built. I wanted them to walk through these rooms and understand, on a visceral level, the work and dedication and love that had gone into creating this home. My mother arrived first. She stood on my front porch for a long moment, just looking at the house like she was trying to absorb every detail. Then she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Maggie," she said. "It's so beautiful." My father followed her inside, moving slowly with his cane, but his eyes were sharp and present. I gave them a tour, and this time it was different than when I'd shown Patty. This time, I told them the story behind each room. I told them about the research I'd done, the mistakes I'd made, the YouTube videos I'd watched at 3 in the morning, the contractor who'd become my friend, the neighbor who'd helped me plant the garden. Free. I showed them the hardwood floors and told them about the day I'd first walked them with bare feet and felt like I was standing on solid ground for the first time in my life. I showed them the kitchen and told them about cooking my first real meal in this house, standing at the counter and crying because I'd done it. Me, alone. I showed them my bedroom, my office, my garden. And with each room, I was showing them pieces of myself, the woman I'd become after they'd rejected me, the woman I'd had to become in order to survive and thrive. My mother held my hand as we moved through the house. My father listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his face thoughtful. In my office, my father stopped in front of a framed photograph on my bookshelf. It was a picture of me at my college graduation, standing between my parents. I was wearing my cap and gown, and I was smiling, genuinely smiling, proud of what I'd accomplished. "I remember this day," my father said softly. "You were so happy, you'd worked so hard, and you'd done so well, and you were happy?" "I was," I said. "I was proud of myself. I thought you were proud of me too." My father picked up the frame and held it carefully, like it was made of glass. "I was," he said. I was very proud of you that day. I don't know when that changed. I don't know at what point I stopped seeing your independence as something to celebrate and started seeing it as a personal rejection." He paused. "That's my burden to carry, Maggie. That's the thing I'm going to have to forgive myself for." We went downstairs and sat in my living room. My mother made tea while I showed them photos on my phone. Pictures of the house from when I'd first bought it, pictures of the renovation process, pictures of the garden at different stages of growth. It was like watching someone else's life unfold in a way. Because in many of these photos I was alone. There was no one there to celebrate with me, no one to encourage me, no one who believed in me. But I had believed in me, and that had been enough. "I want you to know something," I said as we sat with our tea. "The reason I cut contact wasn't to punish you. It was to survive. I needed to prove to myself that I could exist without your approval. I needed to build something that was entirely mine, not influenced by your expectations or your disappointment. We understand that now," my mother said. "At least, I think we do. But I want you to know, even though you didn't need our approval, even though you would have been okay without us, we're here now, and we're proud of you, and we love you. Can you accept that?" I thought about the question. Could I accept their love and pride? Could I let them back into my life without the fear that they would betray me again? "Yes," I said finally. "I can. But it's going to take time. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm not going to act like we're just a normal, happy family. But I'm willing to build something real with you. Something honest. Something better than what we had before." Over the following months, we began to rebuild our relationship on this new foundation of honesty. My parents started coming to my house for dinner once a month. We'd cook together, and my mother taught me recipes from her own mother, recipes I hadn't learned because I'd been too busy trying to stay invisible in my family. I learned to make my grandmother's lasagna and my father's famous pot roast. These small acts felt significant, like we were weaving new threads into the fabric of our relationship. My father started reading books about parenting and family dynamics. He'd call me to discuss what he was learning, to talk through his own insecurities and failures as a parent. It was awkward at first. I wasn't used to my father being vulnerable. But slowly, I began to appreciate this version of him, this man who was willing to examine his own behavior and try to do better. My mother became interested in my career. She'd ask me about my projects, about what I was working on, about my ambitions for the future. It felt strange to have her genuine curiosity, but it also felt wonderful. For the first time, she was asking about my life because she wanted to know me, not because it was her obligation as a mother. Patty became a regular presence in my life too. She'd come over and help me in the garden. We'd go to movies together. We'd talk for hours about everything from fashion to philosophy to our childhood memories. And we'd occasionally talk about the elephant in the room, the $150 earned, the disparity between what she'd been given and what I'd earned. But instead of bitter, those conversations became honest. She recognized the privilege she'd been given, and she wasn't defensive about it. She just accepted it as part of her story. About 6 months into the rebuilding process, my parents did something that surprised me. They asked how much my house had cost them to help fix up. I told them the various amounts. For the roof repairs, the electrical work, the bathroom renovation. They listened quietly, and then my father wrote me a check. "What's this?" I asked. "It's half of what Patty received," he said. "It's not about making things equal. Nothing can do that. But it's about acknowledging that we made a mistake. It's about putting our money where our mouths are when we say we love you." I looked at that check, and I felt something shift inside me. Not gratitude exactly, because I didn't need the money. I'd already proven I could do it without them. But recognition, acknowledgement, a physical manifestation of their regret and their love. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "We know," my father replied. "But we wanted to." I didn't cash that check immediately. I put it in a drawer and let myself sit with it for a while. Eventually, I decided to use it to establish a scholarship fund at my local community college for first-generation students who were struggling with family support. Students like me. Students who had to do it alone and needed to know it was possible. When I told my parents what I'd done with the money, my mother cried. My father hugged me. And I realized that we'd found a way to transform the thing that had hurt us most into something beautiful and meaningful. A year after that first conversation in the restaurant, my family came to my house for a dinner party. My brother flew in from New York. Patty and David came. My parents were there. And I'd invited some of my friends, people who had become my chosen family over the years of isolation. We sat around my dining room table, the one I'd bought secondhand and refinished myself, and we ate and laughed and told stories. My father told a joke that made everyone groan. My mother shared a memory from when I was a child that I'd completely forgotten. Patty and my brother teased me affectionately about something I'd done in high school. And in that moment, surrounded by people I loved and who loved me, I realized that I'd gotten something out of this whole painful journey that I never would have gotten otherwise. I'd gotten my freedom. I'd gotten my independence. I'd gotten the knowledge that I could survive and thrive without anyone's approval or help. But I'd also gotten something else. I'd gotten the ability to choose my family. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My parents weren't perfect. They'd hurt me, and that hurt didn't disappear just because we'd talked about it and decided to move forward. But they were trying. They were showing up. They were being honest about their failures and their fears. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Later that evening, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up, my mother stayed behind. She helped me clear the dishes and wash them at my kitchen sink. Just like we used to do at her house, all those years ago. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, as we worked. I didn't dismiss it or deflect it the way I used to. Instead, I just accepted it. "Thank you," I said. "I'm proud of me too. It's been 5 years now since my parents came to see my house for the first time. 5 years since we sat in that restaurant and had the conversation that changed everything. And I'm sitting on my front porch on a Tuesday afternoon. The same kind of Tuesday afternoon when Patty drove past and saw my house. And I'm thinking about how much has changed. My father passed away 2 years ago. It was sudden, a heart attack, quiet and quick. One day he was here, planning to come over for dinner, asking me about a project I was working on. The next day, he was gone. I got to say goodbye, though. That's what I'm grateful for. After the silence, after the years of not speaking, I got to say goodbye. The night before he died, he called me, just to talk. We didn't say anything particularly profound. We talked about the weather. He told me about a book he was reading. I told him about a difficult client at work. But at the end of the call, he said something I'll never forget. "Thank you for giving me another chance, Maggie," he said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me too. And we said goodnight like we always did. The next morning, he was gone. I spent a long time angry at the universe for taking him before we'd had more time. Before we could build more memories. Before he could see all the ways he'd changed, all the ways he'd become the father I needed him to be. But my mother helped me see something that I hadn't realized on my own. She said, "He spent 2 years showing you that he'd changed. 2 years being honest with you, being vulnerable with you, being proud of you. That's a gift, Maggie. Some people don't even get that." She was right. I was lucky. Lucky that he had reached out. Lucky that I had decided to give him a chance. Lucky that we got those 2 years. My mother is still here. She's 78 now, and she's still the woman she's always been. Organized, determined, loving in her own way. But she's also become more vulnerable. More willing to admit when she's wrong. More interested in understanding the people around her rather than judging them. We have lunch together every Sunday. We cook together. We garden together. And sometimes, we talk about my father. About the man he was. About the ways he hurt us and the ways he tried to make amends. Patty and I are closer than we've ever been. She and David worked through their financial struggles. They downsized their house, learned to live more modestly, and actually found that they were happier with less. It's funny how money can be a teacher if you let it. She's pregnant now, due in 3 months, and I'm going to be the godmother to her baby. When she told me, I cried. Not sad tears, but tears of joy and gratitude that we'd repaired what was broken between us. As for me, I've continued to build my life. I got another promotion at work. I started my own freelance consulting business on the side. I've made more friends. I've gone on dates. I've traveled. I've lived. But the thing I'm most proud of is the scholarship fund. Over the past 5 years, I've helped 32 students pay for their community college education. 32 people who, like me, didn't have family money to fall back on. 32 people who are building their own lives, proving their own worth. Showing the world that you don't need anyone's approval to become something extraordinary. My house has become the heart of my life in a way I never expected. I've hosted countless dinners. I've thrown garden parties. I've had book clubs and pottery nights and quiet mornings alone with my coffee and my thoughts. This house, which began as a symbol of my independence and my defiance, has become something more. It's become a home in the truest sense of the word, a place where people feel welcome, where love is present, where broken things can be healed. There's something I want to say to anyone listening to this story right now, and I say this with all the love in my heart. If you're the one who's been overlooked in your family, if you're the one who's been called a failure, if you're the one who's been given less while your siblings were given more, I want you to know that it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their limitations, their fears, their insecurities. You have the power to build something beautiful on your own. You have the strength to prove yourself to yourself, which is the only proof that really matters. And you have the right to set boundaries with your family, to protect yourself, to withdraw if you need to demand better from them. But I also want to say this: if your family reaches out, if they try to do better, if they show genuine remorse and a willingness to change, consider giving them a chance. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve the possibility of healing. You deserve the possibility of being loved well by your family, even if it takes them a long time to learn how. And maybe most importantly, I want to say this: you are not a failure. You are not too much. You are not too independent. You are not too ambitious. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, and you don't need anyone's validation to make that true. My parents called me a failure, and I almost believed them. But then I looked at my life, at the house I built, at the independence I claimed, at the person I became, and I realized that they were wrong, not because I became rich or famous or conventionally successful, but because I became me, real me, whole me, unapologetic me. That's the real victory. That's what it means to prove you're not a failure. It's not about showing them, it's about showing yourself. 5 years ago, I was a woman sitting in a kitchen with her hands in dishwater, listening to her father tell her she'd never wanted anything badly enough. And something in me decided that day that he was wrong, that I was capable, that I deserved more than the crumbs of approval that my family was willing to give me. So I built a house, but more importantly, I built a life. I built it brick by brick, moment by moment, with my own 2 hands and my own determination, and it's beautiful, not because my family finally agrees that it is, but because I know it is. I look at my house now, at the garden I've cultivated, at the rooms I've filled with love and laughter, at the life I've built here, and I feel something I never felt before in my relationship with my family. I feel like I don't need them to validate me anymore. But I'm grateful they're here to celebrate with me. That's the real transformation. That's the real redemption. And that, my friends, is what really happened.